Good evening, I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, May 12th. Tonight, we begin with an expanding NATO alliance. Finland's leaders have come out in favor of applying to join NATO. And Sweden could do the same within days. That would amount to a historic realignment on the European continent. This comes after President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine sent a shiver of fear through Russia's neighbors. The Kremlin has reacted to the move by Finland by warning that it would be forced to take unspecified retaliatory steps. All right, well, this comes as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada will deploy a general and 6 staff officers to join NATO's multinational division in Latvia. The PM says Canada's contributions to NATO's defense will give Russian President Vladimir Putin pause about expanding aggression into NATO territory. Canada already leads NATO's battle group in Latvia with 695 armed forces members. Mr. Trudeau announced the additional resources during a joint news conference with Latvia's Prime Minister today in Ottawa. Meanwhile, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister says the government has not ruled out imposing sanctions on the woman believed to be Vladimir Putin's girlfriend. Melanie Joly says Canada's goal is to be in lockstep with its allies in imposing sanctions on people with ties to the Russian leader. Former Olympic gymnast Alina Kabayeva is reported to have appeared on a draft list of people who could be sanctioned by the European Union. In the nation's capital, traffic delays were expected again today in downtown Ottawa as an anti-abortion rally descended on the city. Police said they would carry out rolling road closures this afternoon during the annual March for Life protest. The event typically attracts thousands of demonstrators, and it came this year amid renewed attention to the issue, which is due to a leaked draft opinion on abortion rights from the U.S. Supreme Court. A counter-demonstration by the abortion rights advocates also took place near Parliament Hill today. Turning to Ontario's provincial election now, where the New Democrats are promoting their plans to tackle the opioid crisis. They are promising to expand access to safe injection and consumption sites and increase detox beds if they are elected next month. They're also promising to call on the federal government to decriminalize illicit drugs. The Ontario Liberals said they'll restart the opioid task force for several $100 million to expand access to opioid overdose reversal medication and build out more housing with mental health supports. The Progressive Conservatives have said in the unpassed budget, serving as their election platform, that they will provide naloxone kits and training at high-risk workplaces to help reduce opioid overdoses. Provincial data shows 2,423 people died of opioids in 2020. All right, well, meanwhile, the Conservative leadership race continues, with Pierre Poilievre saying if elected as Prime Minister, he would fire and replace Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem. Mr. Poilievre was asked during the Conservative leadership debate in Edmonton last night how long it would take him to reduce interest rates. He said it would depend on how high inflation is when he comes to power, but he added that those responsible for high inflation should be held accountable. Rivals Jean Charest and Leslyn Lewis expressed concern about Mr. Poilievre undermining faith in the nation's financial system. Some concerning news from the International Boxing Association, which is launching an investigation into Boxing Canada after athletes' claims of widespread abuse. The association's directors say the move will help safeguard members of the boxing community. A disciplinary procedure has also been opened against Boxing Canada. The governing body's high-performance director resigned on Sunday, which was 4 days after dozens of current and former boxers asked for a third-party investigation. A United Nations Human Rights Committee has reiterated its call for Canada to stop construction on 2 pipelines in British Columbia. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination says work on the Coastal GasLink pipeline and Trans Mountain pipeline expansion should stop. This until Ottawa obtains consent from all affected Indigenous communities in the province. It cites allegations of surveillance and escalating use of force against those opposed to the projects. Well, with gas prices hitting an all-time high in Canada this week, an expert has some advice for boosting your mileage and saving cash at the pumps. The Canadian Automobile Association's Teresa DeFelice says avoid idling, use cruise control to keep your speed steady during lengthy distances, and plan your trips before hitting the road. She adds that avoiding hard braking and jackrabbit starts when the traffic light turns green can also save you big bucks by keeping your gas in your tank longer. Stay with us. We'll have a look at the markets with Thomas Caldwell up next. Wall Street is pointing toward another down day, with global markets falling sharply on more bad inflation data. The S&P 500 fell 0.4%, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.5%, and the Nasdaq was little changed. The Labor Department on Thursday reported that wholesale prices soared 11% in April from a year earlier. That follows a hot report on inflation at the consumer level on Wednesday. Meanwhile, investors continue to worry amid such market volatility. But should that prevent them from taking risks in the stock market? Well, joining us now to address that question is Mr. Thomas Caldwell, chair of Caldwell Securities Limited. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima.
So volatility is a word that we use on a daily basis now when we talk about the stock markets. But do you see an end to market volatility anytime soon, Mr. Caldwell?
Never. Volatility is a fact of life. Volatility is caused by real events and very often exacerbated by the pro-trading community. A little bit of negative news, they will actually jump on it. And even ETFs can add to volatility. Usually they're the net buyers, but when markets go down, they must liquidate. They can't be subtle about it. They have to sell. So the structures of capital markets add to volatility, but that's going to be the name of the game. And actually, you can use volatility. If you like a position or like a company, have an interest in it over time, and you see it really taking a downdraft, the big question is you have to discern that downdraft. Is it fundamental to the company or is it market induced? And very often these days, it's market induced. Therefore, from a fundamental point of view, it's providing an opportunity. You can use volatility, but volatility, I often say, it's like taking a saw, the blade of a saw, and turning it at an angle. You're going to have the saw teeth and you're going to have the angle of the saw. One is the volatility, the other is the trend. So you really are trying to discern, take the volatility out of your equation for a moment and try to see what angle that saw is pointing to. And that's the key thing in investing and looking at volatility.
All right, sir. Well, we all know we need to buy low and sell high, but this is not what investors typically do. Why is that?
Of course not, because people want the affirmation that everybody else is doing the same thing. And oh, this market's on a run, people are making money, I can get involved, and it's the getting left behind, not being included. So people tend to run toward the top of the market. And then when it goes down, it feeds on itself. Nima, as you know, I've said many times, the biggest enemy to investors is their own emotions. And their emotions go with the herd. That's just the way it is. I tend to be a value investor. I like to buy big companies if I can. And the only way I can create additional value is to purchase them during periods of adversity. My job is to discern whether that adversity is permanent or whether it's temporary, whether the company will survive, and this is indeed an opportunity. Generally speaking, with well-run companies, it's an opportunity.
All right, sir. Well, we're hearing a lot of people talk about risk right now, considering current events, but a lot don't realize just how important risk and containing risk actually is. Can you unpack that for our viewers?
Well, sooner or later, you have to look at risk, because if you don't think about risk, it's thinking about you. So one of the things, the smartest thing I think I ever did when I started our firm 40 plus years ago is no margin accounts. That is, you have to take the precautions before events happen. No margin accounts. I don't think people should borrow money to buy securities. So that saves a lot of aggravation. I mean, it's one thing to be down 10 or 20% in the market. It's another thing to be wiped out when you're highly levered. A lot of the newer investors over the last several years were highly levered and has lost a lot of money. Robinhood, the share price of Robinhood shows you what's happened to those retail investors. So very simple things. Don't get levered up. Don't get caught up in a trend. And when everybody's euphoric, be a little bit cynical. And when everybody's negative, be a little bit optimistic, because an optimist looks at adversity and tries to see the possibilities in those adversities. But risk is always going to be with you. It's how you handle it. And you certainly can't handle it with emotions, whether they be greed or fear.
Some good advice there, sir. Now, on that note, can you tell us a little bit more about the importance of seeking expert advice, especially during such turbulent times?
Well, quelling your emotions being the game, okay? I always keep joking that I haven't had an original idea in years because I live off of the team around me, maybe the genesis of an idea. I hear something, we talk about it, we bounce it around, and it also helps me to quell my emotions. Even when I was a pro trader, you know, the traders around you, you could be offside, you were down a whole bunch of money. Oh, don't worry about it. It helps you to moderate. So I guess in quelling your emotions, generating ideas, refining ideas. I always keep joking. You know, there are times when I'm like King Kong, I'm invincible. And there are times I should not be downtown with more than $10 in my pocket.
Russia is warning that it will have to take what it calls military technical steps in response to Finland's decision to join NATO. Finland's leaders say they want to join the alliance without delay. Moscow says the move will, quote, inflict serious damage on Russian-Finnish relations, as well as stability and security in Northern Europe. The two countries share a land border, which is more than 1,300 kilometers long. Neighboring Sweden is expected to decide on joining NATO within the coming days. Joining us now to discuss these events is Dr. Balkan Devlen, foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Devlen, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me again.
Now, besides Russia's war in Ukraine, what other reasons does Finland have to join NATO?
Russia's war in Ukraine is the primary impetus today. So far, since the end of Second World War, Finland had pursued a policy that very much relies on self-defense, but was very careful in its relations with Russia. And one of the primary things when you talk with the Finnish politicians, they would always highlight the fact that the population, by and large, is not going to be supportive of formal membership in NATO. That doesn't mean that NATO did not work very closely with Finland and Sweden and cooperate in many different areas. But a formal membership have been very, the Finnish public have been skeptical. Russia's war in Ukraine since 2014 started to change the dynamics, but of course the recent invasion, re-invasion in February 24th, really, decisively shifted public opinion, both in Finland and Sweden, heavily favored in favor of formal membership in NATO.
All right, well, we mentioned Moscow is responding by warning Finland about military technical steps. So how might Russia respond to an expanded NATO alliance?
I think there will be a couple of different ways they can respond. I think sort of one of the issues they will probably double down on is their subversion attempts and hybrid warfare structures targeting our democratic institutions and civil society and press, as well as cyber capabilities. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine creates a significant drain on Russia's resources. So I do not necessarily expect a much, sort of a military activity. There will be some. They continue to violate, both NATO airspace as well as Swedish and occasionally Finnish airspace. We probably will see some exercises in the north, in the Baltics, as well as in the Arctic, as sort of a warning as both Finland and Sweden moves towards NATO. But in practice, in practical terms, I think what Russia could do, especially on the military side, is quite limited right now, partly because their resources are heavily stretched because of their botched operation in Ukraine.
All right, well, for some more broader perspective for our viewers, what are some potential impacts of Finland and Sweden joining NATO and how they might be felt outside of Europe?
No, I think it's going to be a great boon in terms of security in the Nordic and the Baltic region. Our Baltic allies, as well as in Germany and Poland, very much, and Denmark, of course, and Norway, very much welcome both Swedish and Finnish participation. Like I said, the cooperation was already there, very closely working, but this would enable both Finland and Norway to be able to develop better interoperability with its EU allies. Both countries are EU members, which also have, I think, a significant impact on the Arctic, which is, of course, important for Canada. With Finland and Sweden joining NATO, Russia will be the only country in the Arctic Council as the non-NATO country. So Arctic will very solidly become a northern flank for NATO, an Arctic flank, and we need to think through the implications of that and how that will strengthen Canada's security in the Arctic. So we need to pay much closer attention to it, and I think it's a net advantage and net positive for Canada to have strong militaries, capable militaries such as Finland and Sweden joining in NATO, not only in the eastern flank and the Baltics, but also for the Arctic. So I think that's very good news.
We'll have to keep our eyes out for. Dr. Devlen, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Stay with us. Up next, we've got more news from around the world as North Korea fires ballistic missiles while they impose a countrywide lockdown to control a COVID-19 outbreak. Qatar's emir meets with Iran's president to support and revive a nuclear deal. U.S. President Joe Biden appeals for a renewed international commitment to fighting the spread of COVID-19. And Costa Rica declares a state of emergency due to crippling ransomware attacks. We'll have these stories and more coming up next. North Korea has imposed a countrywide lockdown to control its first acknowledged outbreak of COVID-19. It comes after the North has held on for more than 2 years about a widely doubted claim of keeping the virus out. A failure to slow infections could have serious consequences due to the country's poor healthcare system and low vaccination rates. Hours after Pyongyang confirmed the outbreak, South Korea said it detected that the North had fired 3 suspected ballistic missiles toward the sea. Meanwhile, Qatar's emir has met with Iran's president and offered support for efforts to revive the nuclear deal between Tehran and world powers. This even as talks on the tattered accord remain deadlocked. The official IRNA news agency quoted visiting Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani as saying after meeting President Ebrahim Raisi on Thursday that Qatar believes that negotiation is the solution of the problem. The two also discussed a range of other issues, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and the war in Yemen. Mr. Raisi seized the opportunity to slam Western nations, insisting that their presence is not providing security in the region, but rather harming it. South of our border, U.S. President Joe Biden has appealed to world leaders for a renewed international commitment to fighting COVID-19. In pre-recorded remarks today, Mr. Biden told the second global coronavirus summit that this pandemic isn't over. Johns Hopkins University says the virus has killed more than 999,000 people in the U.S. Mr. Biden has issued a proclamation directing flags be flown at half-mast to honor the dead. Well, all of this comes as the first factory to produce COVID-19 vaccines in Africa has announced that it has not received enough orders, and it's planning to stop production within a few weeks. This in what a senior World Health Organization official described as a failure in efforts to achieve vaccine equity. South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare said it cannot let its large-scale manufacturing facilities sit idle, and that it would return to making anesthetics. At the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the company shifted its production and it achieved capacity to produce more than 200 million doses annually of the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. U.S. producer prices soared 11% in April from a year earlier. This is a hefty gain that indicates high inflation will remain a burden for consumers and businesses in the months ahead. The Labor Department says its producer price index, which measures inflation before it reaches consumers, climbed 0.5% in April from March. Now that's a slowdown from the previous month when it jumped 1.6%. Meanwhile, the number of Americans applying for jobless aid ticked up slightly last week, but the total number collecting benefits remained at its lowest level in more than 5 decades. Officials in Southern California say a fire that erupted in a coastal area this week has burned at least 20 homes. The blaze is relatively small, about 80 hectares, but gusty ocean winds have blown embers into palm trees and attics. Meanwhile, officials in New Mexico say the largest wildfire in the U.S. is spreading toward mountain resort towns in the state's north. Fire officials there say the fastest moving flames are headed away from the area's biggest population center in Taos. Costa Rica has declared a state of emergency after a month of crippling ransomware attacks. The measure is usually reserved to deal with natural disasters or the COVID-19 pandemic. In theory, it would free up the government to react more nimbly to this crisis. President Rodrigo Chavez, who was sworn in on Sunday, made the emergency declaration one of his first acts. It was published on Wednesday. The declaration refers to the attack Costa Rica is suffering at the hands of cybercriminals and cyber terrorists. Astronomers have released the first image of the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. The wild but fuzzy image shows the black hole known as Sagittarius A near the border of two constellations. It's 4 million times bigger than our sun and 27,000 light years away. Scientists believe nearly all galaxies have similar objects at their centers. A Ukrainian circus troupe is performing a never-ending Alice in Wonderland tour in Italy. They are caught in the real-world rabbit hole of having to create joyful performances on stage while their families at home are living through war. The tour of the theater circus Elysium of Kyiv was originally scheduled to end in mid-March. It is now extended at least through June as the performers seek to keep working to send money to relatives back home. All right, I'm Nima Rajat, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.